going to get started on the first set, which is just going to, every single piece we're going to be copying is just going to be from a plane, and we'll just work our way up past through them as we go along, and I'll just be explaining, you know, just how to approach it, and you know, pretty simple really. We're not going to do anything too, you know, too crazy to begin with. Just keep it really simple, and hopefully you can just understand every step. So basically, if you've got all your hotkeys set up, it should be pretty quick for you, which you can find in the forum. So just make sure before you start that you've got that loaded up, because otherwise you're going to be going back to the interface too much, and it's going to turn into, you know, an hour, 2 hours for you, and it can just be really quick. So the basic technique I use pretty much always, 95% of the time, is edge extrusion, which in Max is just holding down shift and dragging out the edges. So you can do that for anything, rotate, scale. So really quickly you can build up on geometry, and it's a technique that most people that I know who do inorganics primarily use it, just because it's probably the fastest and cleanest way of modeling inorganic stuff. But yeah, so on top of that, we'll just always put a turbo smooth. I haven't actually used mesh smooth since turbo smooth came out, and I always set things at 2 iterations and isoline the display, and then just with tilde, so I can see the show end result, then I can just extrude out, and you can generate nice results pretty quickly. So yeah, that's just basically how we'll start out with each piece. So we'll just get started on a basic extrude technique. So getting started here, we'll just connect it, and then with this remaining piece, extrude it up. Now I've kept some of the hotkeys to the toolbar just so you get an understanding of what I'm doing, but you know, you can use your hotkeys if you want just to do the same operations. So after extruding, you just need to sharpen the edges. If we put a turbo smooth on that, it's going to look a bit blobby because there's nothing actually defining those edges. There's nothing against it. And if I'm ever trying to get like a sharp edge, like on a box, I'll always just keep it to a simple 3 edge line setup. So select the ring, which I've set to Control W, and connect once, and just slide it in pretty close. And select your next row, slide it. Now you'll see it's starting to add a little bit of shape, but you've still got ton of blobbiness up the top. So for this, just to speed things up, you can do a connect and set the segments to 2, and if you use the pinch technique, you can slide it out, which is what I use if I'm ever adding 2 edges at the same time, and that'll just constrain to an edge. You can slide it also if you want. So now that's just a really quick way of getting a nice sharp edge, and if you want, you can continue that outwards just by selecting the border and just doing a simple shift and extrude. So straight away you can get nice sharp edges that way. So that's this one out of the way, and we'll just get on to doing a circular inset just on this plane here. So same technique, just one connect it again this way, and you need another edge defining the sharpness and the roundness of that curve. So one more edge will go there, and then we can just grab these 2, and to get that distance and the triangulation there, we'll just do a chamfer and set that up. Now we'll set it to 15. I've got all my units set to default. So inside there we'll do another connect just to keep it all quads. And then you can just drag this down however far you want. I think it was -5. So once again, there's nothing actually defining that curve, so when you smooth it, it's just going to be a blob. So to define that, I'll grab these two edges here and just do another chamfer on it. Now you can see it's sort of looking alright. Just compare the two, but it doesn't actually have termination. So to do that, you can just do another connect and angle align it. Whoops. You can just slide it up next to here, and then we'll need to weld that just to keep it quads. So I've got that set to Q, and then you can just weld it in. Now it's still looking a bit soft, so if you want, just add another edge. So select an edge along the row, Control W will ring it again, and then you can just connect it once more, and then you've got a nice hard edge. If you need this inside edge here to be sharp also, you can just do another chamfer on it, connect it down the middle, set it to vertice mode, and then just use the cut tool, which I've set to T, and you can cut around, and that'll just create a nice little quad loop for finishing on later. So the best part about edge extrusion technique is if I want to continue that and I want to continue adding detail along that path, you can do that easily just by shift extruding and then grabbing and terminating vertices that you don't need anymore. So you can just just target weld these together. That leaves you with two triangles, but because everything's kept to 3 edge loops, you can just terminate it off, and that'll just softly fall off into a new sort of gradient. And you can just continue that on however you like, just extruding out and then target welding back into place. So this is just another simple one. Just goes into adding a nice sharp inset into geometry that's consistent edge loops around that you can terminate. So this one will require 2. You can just pinch that out, pinch it out again, and rather than extruding this time, you can do a straight dragging down just to get that sharp edge. So chamfer these off. This was defining that sharpness. Chamfer it again, and then you can drag this face down. Now if you put another turbo smooth on that, it'll once again be blobby and not defined. So you'll need to define 2 edges along here. So once again, connect it and slide, and just do another connect and slide that, and it's sort of defining the inside faces, but you still haven't defined the 3rd edge on the outside. So for this you'll need to go back to 1 segment on the connect and just slide that into place. And just another slide, just on all 4 edges. And you'll see that it's starting to become pretty hard. We've got a little bit of a problem here, which looks like it was due to chamfering error, I guess. To fix that, we can just connect half here, and you can just delete that. And because everything's kept fluent in terms of lines connecting, it's not a problem to just connect that back up again. So you just collapse it back into an editable poly, drag over these, snap them, and weld it, and then you'll have your inside face again. Now we're just going to get the outside working. So for that, you'll need 2 edges. So sometimes if you've got 2 edges and the slide tool doesn't work, sometimes it'll slide both in, sometimes it'll slide both out. If that's not working, just keep it to 0, convert your selection to vertices. Oops. Convert your selection to vertices, and then you can just scale them. If you've got a crooked edge, you can snap that to an edge so it stays clean, and just do the same for this loop. Convert to a vertice mode, extrude out. Then it's just a simple matter of shift dragging down and scaling out, and everything's kept consistent. So if you need to go in and add more detail later on, you can just connect it and it'll all line up. So every time you need those 2 loops there, just change the settings in this connect box dialog, and now you'll see that it is nice and smooth. So that is that one out of the way. The next one's a little bit trickier. It's just involving cutting into the mesh. So usually most circular insets only need to be 8-sided, which will produce a perfect circle. Any more is just, it's fine if you have to add like tons of detail and all those edge loops need to go somewhere. It's fine to have it, but the minimum is 8. 6 doesn't produce the perfect circle, but 8 is the hotspot for that sort of stuff. So just connect 2 lots, which will create that 8-sided point that you need. So I've had a few people ask me sort of how I do this circular inset, and I use curves to project onto the surface. So I'll set snap on, which I've got set to snap to vertice. So just right click that and set to vertice mode, and that'll just lock. So now that you've got that 4-sided, the 4 planes, you can just drag out and then it'll always snap. So just make a simple circle, take off snap again, and from above, if you switch to vertice mode and turn on snap again, it'll automatically snap to those faces. And all it's doing is basically just cutting, but aligning it to that curvy shape. So you can cut any shape you want based on a curve using this technique, and it's just created that simple, really simple. Keep it on and you can just terminate up to the edges. This one doesn't look like it wants to go. Sometimes the cutting tool in Max doesn't work, just based on the perspective view. It can't calculate where you're cutting from, and sometimes it slips. And it's a little bit annoying, but just rotate your view, or sometimes you'll just have to do cuts in the orthographic views. So straight after adding that shape, I always delete the face, just because it's faster to shift drag rather than extrude. So the extrude way, you're extruding out, and it's a little bit tedious if you need to go in and add more edges. So I always delete the face, shift drag in a little bit more, and then just drag down. And then you can cap it, and always make sure to terminate those edges again. So there's just a simple way of cutting into a mesh and adding a certain shape, but sometimes it'll always slip, just because the cut tool sucks a bit, to be honest. You'll see here, you can always tell where it slipped just based on the turbo smooth. So you'll see that it hasn't lined up correctly there. So just swap to vertice mode, target weld, and target weld it back up, and that'll produce a clean result. So you can see up here also it's not smoothing correct, so that's another problem. And just always checking sort of where you're at with the model. If you don't check and you've done 50 of these cuts, it's a bit of a pain in the ass to go back and fix every single one of them up. So it's better to just do it as you're going. So you can, once again, just like in the previous mesh, just shift drag out just to continue it, and you can do all sorts of stuff that way. If you've got a row of vertices that isn't lined up and you need that to be straight again, just turn on edge snap, and if you snap it back up and then drag it back down, you'll have your sharp edge again. The other good reason for this sort of simple technique is that if you ever need to have multiple like lots of detail like this, like you make 3 of these, you don't have to do it 3 times because all the vertices line up exactly, so you can connect them all together and snap them. Oh, sorry, edges on. Snap them together. And just weld that stuff up again. You'll have all your detail consistent, and you don't need to do it 3 times. So this next technique is just sort of showing curvy surfaces and how it works, having the show and result mode on, and like how that keeps things clean as possible. Oops, mouse is slipping a bit here. So once again, just straight out cut. You add a couple, doesn't really matter. So we can see that once again there's nothing defining those shapes. So you'll need to go in and cut them. Just weld these back up. So that'll create your first curve. Now we need to follow that same pattern along the top here. And then you'll have another your second sharp area. Now I probably wouldn't continue it like that. I'd rather have it rounded. So you can just continue it down. It's better to have this flat surface on the non-curvy area, just because it can produce a couple of nasty results if you've got a more curvy surface. So now we're going to try and define this edge here. So once again, do a simple cut, turn on edge mode, slide it, and slide it back, and just turn off that constraint. So you see it's just producing a nice curvy result, and at any point you can just connect that and sharpen areas up. So it's just basically just a ton of repetition, really. I mean, there's not a lot of people, well, there's nowhere near as many people learning inorganic stuff as there was, but for me it was sort of similar to most people learning ZBrush and stuff like that. It's pretty simple when you think about it. It's just a ton of repetition, and if you practice it enough, you'll figure out how to, you know, achieve nice curves. And so now we'll target weld back here and just try and terminate this. So there you've just got a sharp point, and it's all clean because everything's kept flat, and because you've done an edge extrusion technique, if you need to terminate this stuff, just like in the first one, you can just target weld these together, delete the remaining face, and then you've got a nice soft fall off again. So using this method, it's just really simple actually, just to keep adding detail and refining it, because you can always add on. If you need to continue back into that 3-point system, you can just cut it out and delete the inside face again. And then when you keep shift extruding, you'll be back into a hard mode. So this last piece, which is the most difficult, is just using a couple of the techniques in these first pieces and using them on the same model. So to start off on this one, just another plane. And we'll just lift these up. And as long as you stick to this rule of 3 edges, you can always terminate and join up new edge loops without any problems. But if you've got, 5 edges trying to line up to 2 edges, it's not always going to smooth well, and you'll need to sort of bring it back to that basic 3-point system. So this will be producing a nice hard edge, and now we're going to try and use that projection technique to cut the circle into it. So just collapse that back again to a standard poly. We'll go in and add that vertex there, and now we've got a 4-point system. So get the circle, interpolation set to 1, which will give you the 8-sided. Snap it. So just going to cut into it again. Don't worry about these added vertices here, we'll clean those up later. So once you've done it, connect up the corners. And delete this inside face, or faces. So you'll get sort of something that looks a bit like that, but even though it looks a bit wonky from this view, from above it's a perfect circle. So in machinery or something like that, that would be totally acceptable, because the bolt would be coming down and not from the side. So grab the edge, shift drag it, and this is where you get rid of these vertices. Just target weld them up and delete the remaining face. Now you've got something that looks a little bit messed up, so you'll have to snap that, and you can add another turbo smooth back on, just see where you're at. So it's not producing any pinching here, which is what we want. Once again, and terminate it. Once again, it's stuffed up. It's easy to spot. So there's the fixed version. Now this vertex here is acting a little bit strange, so set edge snap on whenever you want to. The whole point is to try and keep that flat surface. That's why you've done the cut technique, because it's not actually messing up any curves. You know, you're not having to wiggle stuff around, and that's when you start to get errors. Whereas if you keep it all flat, there's just no physical way that it can stuff up. I'll just move this back. And there's that part done. And same thing goes if you need more hard edges, because you've looped it correctly. You can just connect, and it's not going to pinch. It's just going to stay perfectly clean. Now I've moved that just because it's just to keep it clean, but you can see there that it's lopsided a bit. Don't worry about that. Now we're going to cut like we did with the previous piece. So this is just an exact rip of this piece, but on a curved surface. So to do that, you'll need the ending loop, which is wonky. So turn on edge snap and snap it. Terminate these. Because that's edge snap, this is still a perfectly flat surface and it's not messing up. And now you can just go in and chamfer it. Connect. And you got to define that edge, loop it, chamfer it, and this is, if you want, you can just do a simple snap. Now to get the border happening, going to extrude down and snap along the Z path. Let's do a connect, snap. So yeah, you can see it's just a lot of repetition. once you've got down this 3-point curve system, it's just a ton of repetition, and might seem a little bit boring, but when you're creating original shapes and stuff, it can be pretty interesting. So as long as you stick to that rule of 3 edges, you're set. You can terminate stuff at any point down the road. You need to lower edge loops here. It's just easy to do that, and you continue on. So you need more edges down the bottom. Always just defining stuff. Try and keep it as a loop. Doesn't matter if it messes up, just angle snap it. And you can produce sharp results again. And any single technique here can just be sort of merged into one, because everything's, using this plane technique, if you've got a box, you'd have to delete faces, and it doesn't always work out so well. But this way it should keep you clean. Well, yeah. That's it for the first one. Thanks, guys.